Hello folks, I'm Alex, this is Alex Unabridged, and these are my thoughts on The Terror by Dan Simmons. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, time to have a chat about what I thought of The Terror by Dan Simmons. I read this over the last 3 months. This was the first pick for my Quarterly Chonk project. And in case you don't know what that is, this is a reading project where I'm putting out a poll to my lovely viewers, that's you, at the beginning of each quarter, asking folks to vote on one of 3 big old books for me to read over the coming 3 months. And in January, for quarter 1, you lot picked this mammoth tome of The Terror at 940 pages. And so I've been trucking on with reading this, and I finished it on the last day of March, so I was in time. And yes, this has been a fantastic reading experience. Just reading something over 3 months as opposed to trying to get something in all in, in a month or in a week sometimes. Reading this over 3 months has been brilliant. And the book, I have to say, has been thoroughly enjoyable. So what is The Terror about then? Well, this is set in the mid-1800s on board ships Erebus and Terror, as they are basically out in the Arctic searching for the Northwest Passage, so a way through the ice. This is part of the Royal Navy Discovery Service, on a mission led by Sir John Franklin, who is the overall expedition leader and captain of Erebus, and Captain Francis Crozier, who is the captain of Terror. And in addition to all of the kind of terrors and sort of horrendous events and conditions that a mission up in the Arctic is bound to suffer from, especially in the 19th century, you've also got a supernatural threat that Simmons has superimposed on top of this historical fiction. So yeah, it's a really interesting and kind of sort of seamless mix of fact and fiction, I think. I love this period of history and this type of history. I've not read any for a while, but I'll definitely be reading more now I've read this, because this has inspired me to get back into it. And that's maritime discovery history, especially 19th century. And I know little snippets about what apparently happened to Erebus and Terror in real life. Can never know everything because the ships were lost. Erebus was discovered reasonably recently, and other discoveries have been made over the years. Graves of some of the crew members on land, and sort of artifacts, things like that have been found. Some documentation, but not a huge amount. So we'll never know exactly what happened. And that gives Simmons the perfect excuse to kind of go a bit nuts, I think, with speculation, and certainly supernatural speculation, but speculation about some of the stuff that happens on board the ships between the men as well. So there is a fair amount of fact in there, but there is a lot of speculation as well. It is historical fiction at the end of the day. So yeah, it's told kind of, each chapter is from the perspective of a different character. You hear from some more than others, and they flip sort of backwards and forwards between different characters, but we hear from quite a few different ones, some a lot more than others. So I think Crozier is who I'd call the main character in this, who's the captain of Terror. But we hear from Sir John Franklin, and we hear from some of the men on board, both the petty officers and some of the warrant officers, and even lower down. And the sort of chapters, the timeline, if you like, skips around a little bit. It's mostly linear, but it does kind of go backwards and forwards. But through this kind of this format of sort of a chapter per character, we really do get inside their heads. And over a long period of time as well, in terms of, you've got 940 pages of this, so there is plenty of opportunity for really strong character development, and Simmons does nail that, in my opinion. I thought the character work in this was excellent. You do kind of get invested. I very quickly actually get invested in the character, or I did. And there's plenty of variety in there in terms of, everybody's flawed, absolutely. And they're not all likable by any means, although you do grow to like some, I think, by the end. But there are villains in there amongst the men as well. It's not all about the supernatural threat. There are villains amongst the human characters in this. And there's a hell of a lot going on in terms of character relationships, dynamics on board. It's really, really good character-wise. The setting of it is wonderful. It's a perfect one for winter. It's a cold book. It's definitely a cold book. I needed my blanket on when I was reading it. But the setting, I think, is one of the strongest elements of it in terms of the way Simmons writes it. It's really evokes such a sense of isolation, desolation, very oppressive, even though it's wide open spaces and it's, a lot of white as well, because it's all ice. It's bleak, and as I say, it's desolate, and it feels threatening. The setting itself is absolutely the biggest threat, I think, in this. And as I say, Simmons writes it so well, the way, when you have just got an expanse of ice, it could, it could go the other way and it could become a bit boring, but he manages to find all of these different ways to talk about it, or, he sort of focuses on different elements of it. There are so many different elements of the terrain, different elements of the ice, if you like, that he kind of, it's always kept kind of interesting. And the elements of sort of darkness, especially when they're in the winter, and because it's so far north, of course, you don't get any daylight. It's 24 hours of darkness. That adds another level to it. I think obviously the setting is a real setting, so you've got plenty to work with. But the way that Simmons actually writes it and describes it and works it into the other supernatural threat, and the way that it plays on the men's minds, things like that, it was really, really good. I really enjoyed that. I think that was my favourite thing about it. Talking of Simmons' writing, it's I like his writing. I like his writing a lot. It took me a little while to get into it though, because man, does that guy use a lot of words, and that's coming from me, who's quite wordy. A lot of run-on sentences, a lot of kind of paragraph-long sentences. Sometimes I think somebody needs to, hand him some punctuation. But it worked for this, I think, because it felt quite a formal style, and because of the time period in which it's set, and some of the speech that's in it, especially from the officers, there is a formality there. There is a different sort of language structure, if you like, that is right for the time in which it's set. So I didn't mind too much. I've not read any other Simmons. This is my first Dan Simmons, so I don't know what he's like in other books. But for this, it did fit. It just took me a while to get my head into it. It's not dry. It's never dry, I have to say. It's just sometimes it's a bit, I had to read some of it out loud to make sure I'd actually got the sort of pattern correct and the sort of the structure correct. But he does have some really beautiful turns of phrase. He can be quite poetic at times. And as I say, his language choice and the way that he kind of evokes threat and the environment is excellent. I've got a couple of quotes that I just particularly liked of his writing. First one is, Crozier's sigh emerges as ice crystals that hang in the air for a second and then fall to the deck like so many minuscule diamonds. I really like that imagery. And then the second one is seabirds flying overhead in such profusion as to almost darken the blue Arctic summer sky. Birds on shore, on floes, and lining the irregular tops of icebergs like musical notes on a score. Yeah, I think his imagery, the way he really kind of creates that imagery in it. There's so many. There were so many quotes that I pulled out for this. Yeah, I think he's got a really great style for enabling me to visualize everything, really. It's very detailed, and it's very detailed when it comes to things like the ships, and the construction of the ships, if you like, how the ships work, the different parts of the ships, things like that. It's a very detailed writing style, and he adds in kind of plenty of references, things like that. You know, other literary references. There's quite a lot of Greek references in there. There's references to Shakespeare, to Poe, to Darwin. You know, lots of stuff, because some of the men on board are, you know, they are literate and they like literature. So there's you know, stuff brought in from that. There is some interesting sort of language use when it comes to some of the Inuit characters that come in. There are a couple of Inuit characters that come into it, and that side of things is quite interesting as well. Although I'd like to know more about his sources, Simmons' sources on that. I couldn't find much in the sort of author's note, and whether he got sort of whether he actually had some consultation with Indigenous people. I don't know. That would be something I'd like to know though, because there's quite a bit about sort of culture, Inuit culture as well, and I'd like to know that he's done his due diligence on that. But yeah, it's complex writing style, but it works definitely. Plot wise, God, there's a lot going on in this. It's, you know, and it's kind of, there's a repetition in terms of the days, the sort, you know, the time periods that they are stuck in this ice. They're stuck in this ice for 2 years, and it could become repetitive in terms of that kind of trudge, or that, you know, drudge of day after day after day of the same routine, you know, the same weather, the same light conditions, etc. But it never feels repetitive at all. The pacing, I think, was really good. It lost me, it didn't lose me, but it went off a little bit at times, but then when it did slow down and we got into a very kind of talky bit, there's quite a lot of conversations between the officers, or there's quite a lot of sort of musings of characters within their own minds, and that takes the pace slower for a while. There were a couple of points where I kind of was starting to get to the point where I was like, come on, it's getting a little bit grindy now. Quite quickly it shifted, and the next chapter would be like straight into action or something. And the action was great. Yeah, the action stuff was great. Not a huge amount of it, but when it was there, it was brilliant. And yeah, the plot generally was very satisfying. It was, you know, most of the resolutions to the sort of the character arcs were, yeah, I really liked. Funnily enough, the one that I wasn't entirely sure about, and I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it, is really the end of it, the last few chapters of it. I don't know. I'm not going to spoil it, obviously, so I'm not going to tell you why and what happens there. But yeah, I'm just not. I don't know. I think maybe it wasn't satisfying for me. I think it's a personal thing. It wasn't bad by any means. I think it was just maybe went in a direction that I kind of went, oh, okay. But yeah, it as I say, it didn't spoil the enjoyment, and it was a really tiny section of like 940 pages. It was probably like maybe 60-70 pages of that amount, so I can't complain too much. But yeah, it didn't necessarily feel like the best resolution for me. But I generally loved it, to be honest. I think taking that historical, that factual event of this mission by the Royal Naval Discovery Service, these two actual ships, Erebus and Terror, and using so much of what we do know about the history, but then really adding in some extra stuff on top of that, this supernatural threat. That I love that. I think that's great, and I want to read more of that. Yeah, there's plenty of ideas and sort of philosophy themes and stuff in here as well. There's lots of stuff about kind of faith, not just religious faith, but faith in yourself, what you're doing, and are you doing the right thing for the men underneath you as a captain of the crew? Responsibility, things like that. Quite a lot about, sort of dealing with your own demons. And even stuff, like the class system as well, the haves and have-nots, equality, things like that. There's quite a bit in about that. Suffering is definitely, and how people deal with suffering is definitely in there. There's plenty to think about throughout it. But what I kind of feel about it most is more of this just kind of, it's a constant low-level tension of and a feeling of oppression of, these men trapped in this situation with no way out. And yeah, that was particularly enjoyable, weirdly, in it. There's some quite gruesome stuff in there, some difficult stuff to read, in terms of things that happen, bit of gore, stuff like that, but thoroughly enjoyable. And it's definitely made me want to go off and read some of the history again as well, and find out more about Terror and Erebus and that particular expedition. But some of the others, the Antarctic expeditions that are mentioned, and just generally some more kind of maritime discovery expeditions. That's definitely something I want to look at, possibly for Historathon. Now that I'm doing that, I might pick up some actual history books on it, and just the conditions as well. There's a couple of books I've had on my list for ages about sort of more shipwrecks and what happens and how people behave when they get shipwrecked, and it's quite gruesome, but it's quite fascinating in terms of how quickly people can turn to some quite what we would think of today certainly as abhorrent behaviour. It also took me back to previous trips to places like Greenwich and Portsmouth particularly, where the big maritime museum is, where they've got some of the ships that have been restored, and they've got the Mary Rose, which is being conserved, what's left of it. But they've got the Victory, which has been conserved, and you can go on the Victory now, which is that's earlier than these ships. But that was fascinating when I went there. And then they've also got the Warrior, which is a little bit later in terms of its time period. But I love that stuff, especially if I can go and see the actual vessels. I love it, absolutely love it. Total geek for that. I have built model ships in the past. I have built a model of Victory in the past and things like that. So yes, it's definitely made me want to go back into that element of history, which is always great. And just random note, when I was kind of looking stuff up as I was reading this about John Franklin and people like that, I didn't know this, but Sir John Franklin went to the same school as me, in Louth, where I grew up. So we are alumni of the same grammar school, which is quite strange, and I didn't know that. I was really surprised they didn't ram that down our throats. There, no, they rammed Tennyson. That was the one that they pushed all the time. It's Tennyson went here, but never anything about Sir John Franklin. So I don't know. But yeah, that was just an interesting side note for me. So yes, overall, absolutely loved this. I thought this was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this, especially over the 3 months. I think having that kind of prolonged period, reading something about a load of people trapped somewhere for a prolonged period, really worked, definitely. And as I say, it's a great winter book with it being cold. So let's have a little look at a rating then. What rating have I given this? So I will go through the individual elements first. So I've given it a 9 for character work. Yeah, this is some great character work in this. Some of the best character work I've seen in a while. Getting up there, you know, sort of comparably with Stephen King for me in the strength of the character writing. Atmosphere, that gets a 10. This is one of the best, certainly real world kind of environments for me. The way that it was written, it was so easy to kind of visualize it and imagine it. It was fantastic. Writing, I've given an 8 for. As I say, a couple of bits where I just felt it could have like been edited a little bit. You know, maybe Simmons' editor could have just gone, just pull it back a bit, just pull that word use back a bit. Plot wise, I've given it an 8. As I say, its pacing was generally okay, a couple of drop-offs, and just a little bit of a not sure about the ending really. But that, as I say, that's probably very subjective to me. Ideas, an 8 again. Plenty of stuff to think about, which is, as I say, developed through the character work largely. And I just really love this idea of taking a known historical event and superimposing something supernatural on top of it. That worked so well. And so my enjoyment of it then was 9, a 9 out of 10. I've had a really, really good time with this. So if we add all of those up and divide by 6, we get an 8.67 out of 10. I will round that down to an 8.5 out of 10. But yeah, generally this was very good, if not excellent. And this will go on Storygraph as a 4-star, I think. So yes, I would definitely read it again. In fact, I'd probably double dip and buy this on audiobook and have it to listen to. I think it could be really interesting to listen to if it's read well. So I'll check the sample out before I do that. But yeah, I'd quite like to have this on audiobook that I can just put on, you know, when I'm traveling or something. I think that could be a really good one to listen to. So I will definitely be reading some more of Mr. Simmons' work. Yeah, really interesting. I like his, as I say, I like his writing style and just really interesting imagination with stuff. Yeah, the one that actually really intrigues me that I think I'll try next isn't one of the ones that I think is most well known. I mean, the ones that I see pop up all the time are Carrying Comforts, Summer of Night, is it, and Drood, that I'm not really that bothered by, I have to say, because isn't it Dickens and Wilkie Collins? I'm not a fan of Dickens, so I don't know how to get on with that one. But the one that I really want to go for next is The Abominable. Funnily enough, you know, I like Abominable Snowman stuff. Anyway, it's my favourite cryptid. But this one, I think that one is set in the 20s, not long after the Mallory expedition up Everest. And someone, you know, this is the story of another expedition that goes up to try and figure out what happened to Mallory and his expedition partners, essentially. And obviously there's something on the mountain that's some sort of supernatural threat or cryptid threat, however you want to describe it. But yeah, that one, because I love mountain stuff and anything to do with high altitude stuff, and Everest as well. I love my Everest history, things like that. That one, yeah, I think that one's right up my street, so I'm going to give that one a go. But yeah, definitely we'll try plenty more of his stuff. I was really impressed with this. So thank you everybody for that pick. Fantastic first pick. Right, so that'll do from me today then. If you haven't already heard, Swan Song is my pick, or is what you've picked for me for quarter 2 for the Quarterly Chonk. I've just started that, and so far, yeah, interested, definitely interested. So I'll keep you posted as we go along the next 3 months on how I'm getting on with that. But yeah, that'll do from me today. I've rambled on long enough, as always. Thank you very much for watching today, folks. Do drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you've read The Terror, what did you think of it? Or if my ramblings have convinced you that you need to try it, you do, it's really good. I'll be back on Friday with my slightly belated wrap-up of the 2 Angela Carter novels that I read in March as far as part of my My Month With project, where I'm reading more stuff from authors that I've only read a tiny bit of before. So that's Angela Carter on Friday. So I hope you'll join me for that then. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.